Okay, guys, welcome back to Let's Get Freaky. I am so excited for our guest today. I've been waiting to talk to this gentleman for a long time. We have got Neil Wald with us. How are you, brother? Thank you very much for being here, man.
No problem at all, Tommy. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, we recently met at the Cryptid Conference UK, which was absolutely brilliant in Somerset. And the funny thing is, so I interviewed Mark Anthony Wyatt a little while ago. Awesome dude. And he, after we spoke, he sent me your details and was like, "You've got to talk to this guy." And I was going to reach out to you anyway. And then we met, and I was like, "I know this man. I know this man already." And we had a great chat. You very kindly interviewed me for your show, which was really cool, and was with Andy Decode as well, and lots of other cool people. And then I put pictures out on my Facebook and stuff, and Mark was like, "Oh, you met Neil?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." It's like it all clicked, and I was like, "Wow!" So I was actually going to reach out anyway, but yeah, man, here we are.
Cool. Yeah, Mark. I haven't seen him in a few years. I think I last bumped into him in about 2018,
Mhm.
and he had come back from the States because he's in the States now.
Yeah.
But when I first met him, he was living in Cornwall, I think. And I, at the time, ran this paranormal meetup group in a pub in the town of High Wycombe, near to where I lived at the time. And he came up all the way from Cornwall, bless him, to do a talk for the
Oh
group
wow.
about ghosts and stuff like that. And he brought
Yeah.
his friend. And so they stayed overnight at a friend's house who put them up for the night. And the very next morning, I drove back to my friend's house where Mark and his friend were staying. And I did an interview with him outside in the garden, which is the link I think I sent you where he cut my
Yes.
hair.
I
Yeah.
watched it. I couldn't believe it. It looks completely
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So he did a lovely little chat for me. And yeah, so he very kindly got in contact with me recently to say that he's seen a copy of my book, True Tales of the Paranormal, on a bookshelf in the States. Which I
Wow.
was pleasantly surprised about because I
Yeah.
understood there was problems getting the distribution sorted. So when he spotted it out there, he told me straight away. He spotted it in a shop in California. So I thought, oh, that's cool. That's out there. Thanks very much.
Wow. How cool's that?
Yeah. So
Awesome, man.
it's good to have people around the world keeping a tab on things, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. And the world is so much more connected now, which is really cool. Like, we're all, because of this, because we can do this, we're all like, feel like we're all a part of the same thing. I know we're countries apart and stuff, but we're pretty close now. And me and you are very close right now, which is really cool. You're just down the road from me.
Yeah. I think it's probably about 20 miles or something.
Yeah. I could walk to you.
Yeah. That tin can of string is coming handy.
Yeah. So when I saw you, as soon as I saw you, I recognised. I've definitely seen you in like documentaries and stuff. Is that right? You've done a lot of documentaries and things like that.
Um, I don't know about. Well, I've done a few things. I've appeared on Channel 4 back in the 90s, not like regularly. Like I did a thing on Channel 4 TV back in 98 or 99,
Mhm.
talking about dreams and creativity with dreams and things. And I did something to do with sacred trees and stuff like that. But I wasn't the main person in the documentary. I was just a bod with a group of people walking around the woods trying to look interested. And, I've worked on things with people, done lots of interviews with people. I've written books, Fairy Craft back in 2004. The more recent one was True Tales of the Paranormal, which the one I just mentioned to you. And I've just completed another book, which will be due out under the same publisher, which will come out in about November 2025, which is called Unsolved Modern Mysteries of the Unexplained, I think, something like that.
No, awesome, man. You've also got an awesome show, the Paranormal Peep Show,
That's right.
which is really cool as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
What got you into these subjects? I'd like to go to the start, where
Yeah.
where
Yeah,
this
I
all
can
began for
understand.
you.
Yeah, so basically, I think it's like a lot of us, it starts off in childhood. Either you've got that interest in it or you haven't. And I don't think it's suddenly gonna latch onto you when you're 35 or something. You got to have it right at the beginning.
Mhm.
And you, of course, back then we didn't have the internet, as you say, so we're getting a lot more information now about things and we're learning things quicker. But back then, you were lucky if you found a book on ghosts in the library or something, you know. But I always had a weird fascination for anything like that. I loved all the science fiction shows I had growing up as a kid. I liked Doctor Who at the time. It was John Pertwee, I think, the Doctor I grew up with, and then later Tom Baker. Um, and then I love shows like Star Trek and Space 1999, all these shows that they used to repeat from the 60s and 70s, like Time Tunnel, uh, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, all those crazy shows. Loved them all. Um, but then I think as I got a bit older, I asked my mum an engaging question, which I thought was, looking back, was a bit kind of highbrow for me. But I said to my mum, where was I before I was born? And I said, well, I must have existed. I must have been somewhere, even though I couldn't remember where I existed. I could not imagine myself not existing. And so she said, well, you didn't exist. And so that always puzzled me a little bit. But, you put it to the back of your mind and you carry on. And then at some point, people started to give us old copies of Reader's Digest magazines. And I used to occasionally look through them. And I always found these articles in there very interesting about what happened to a person on the operating table. They would die for 3 minutes or something, and they go out their body to this tunnel of light. And I thought, oh, that's really strange. Is that true? And so that was my kind of first introduction in the world of media, I suppose, of these things. And then I used to see programs on the TV. There was a program about mysteries with a guy called Magnus Magnusson, who did the Mastermind TV series back in the 70s when I was a kid. And then later on, as the kind of 80s rolled round, the late 70s, early 80s rolled round, I'm giving my age away here. There was a lady called Doris Stokes. You might have heard of her. She was a medium, and she appeared on TV. And now a medium is a person that communicates with the dead, so they claim. And she was saying that she could hear the voices of the dead or spirits talking to her. And that really intrigued me. And so I used to watch her on the TV. She was a very elderly lady then. She's since passed over herself. And then another program came on the TV called the Arthur C. Clarke Mysterious World Program. And in that, he covered all sorts of strange subjects. Are there Bigfoot? Are there Sasquatches? And one episode was, Can We Talk to the Dead? And in that, he covered mediums and strange encounters with spirits and that sort of stuff. He was kind of skeptical of the whole thing himself, ironically. Even though he introduced the program, he used to introduce the beginning of the program and the end of the program, but the narration of the program of what was going to come up, and it was done by a lady called Anna Ford. I think she was an ITN newsreader at the time, but they used her voice to link to the different items in the show. But at the end of every show, it always concluded with Arthur C. Clarke, who was the writer of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And he would sort of say, well, I'm not so sure of this evidence. I don't think it's strong enough, and blah, blah, blah. And you're thinking, well, why are you in this program if you don't believe it then? I was like, well, that's weird. But in that particular program, they showed a place called the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, where this medium was doing a demonstration of clairvoyance along with a psychic artist who would supposedly see the spirits of the dead and draw pictures of them. And I found out about that place. And so I rang them up using directory inquiries and managed to book myself a reading. I think I was 16 at the time, 17. And I went up on the train with a few friends. And that's where I had my first psychic reading with a medium at the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain. And they said to me, by the way, you can do this. And I said, me? I don't think so. I've never seen a ghost or anything. I'm pretty sure of that. But they kept saying it in different readings. And so it kind of sprungboard from there, this curiosity that about all these things like ghosts and things, and the fact that I was told I got this ability. And later on, I joined a psychic developing circle, which is where mediums train to become mediums, if you like. And I started to, get interesting information come through my mind, and voices or see images, that kind of thing. And that's what clairvoyance is, basically. There's clairsentience, clairaudience, clairvoyance, and all these other clairs. They're the different senses, but of your mind, if you like. Mm-hmm. And that's where you kind of receive the impressions of the spirits or the dead, if you want to call it like that. So it springboarded from curiosity, really. And it kind of snowballed. The more things I watched, the more information I was finding, and it carries on today. It doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I feel like there's so much information out there with the paranormal, so many different experiences, different topics within the paranormal, cryptids, ufology, ghosts, you know, and they all seem to be connected, but at the same time not as well. So you can go down some rabbit holes with this stuff.
Yeah, you don't often come up for air either.
No, it's very addictive. If you enjoy this stuff, it's amazing. You know, I've had experiences myself. You know, I know there's more going on around us. You know what it is, I don't know, but it is so fascinating. So when you was a kid and you was into all this kind of stuff, which is, you're right, for most people when it begins, you know, that it's like a magic, in it. Did you have any experiences as a kid? Was there anything that
Well, as I said, I don't think I saw ghosts or spirits. I don't claim to have heard voices as a kid. So I wasn't one of these, what I would call a natural medium, where you read these accounts of people said, "Oh, I've always seen ghosts ever since I was a kid. I was 3 years old." I did have I think I was telling you this at the cryptid conference, but I'll repeat it, where I woke up one morning early and my brothers were scared out of their wits. We shared a bedroom together. We lived in a block of flats at the time in Amersham, and they hid their heads under these blankets because we had this chest of drawers, a white chest of drawers, that appeared to be coming down the bedroom, rattling down the bedroom from the corner, and it was going past their beds and coming towards me just by itself. And I was scared, and I put my blanket over my head because it's obviously protection, you know. But I had one of these woolen blankets where you could still see through the holes, and so I could still see this thing coming towards me. And I remember then just not having any more experience. I just remember waking up and everything was normal. So I'm thinking, well, maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was a nightmare. I don't know. But I just remember that so clearly. And that was like 1966, something like that, maybe. So it was just a peculiar one. So that's the only thing that I can say appeared paranormal. But at the time, it probably was a dream, I would say. I'd have to, you know, a skeptic say, "Oh, it's obviously a dream." And I'll be prepared to accept it was a dream. I can't prove it one way or the other. So I, as I say, I never claimed to have seen ghosts or spirits. The only time that it started to kind of become real for me, apart from the interest of reading these other accounts of people, was when I was invited to join this psychic developing circle, and I was probably about 20 years old, so it's quite a bit later on. And as I say, in there's a whole load of people. They sit around in a circle. There might be 5 or 6 of these people with a medium who's in charge and sort of saying, "This is what you have to do," sort of then giving you instructions. And we were given instructions to tune in to the person, i.e. try and focus on the person that's sitting opposite you in this room, go into a meditation and try and get some information about them. Don't ask them, don't speak to them, just go, shut your eyes and say, "Give me some information about the man opposite." Now, the man opposite me was a guy called Eric. I remember that. He was in his mid-60s. And so you just shut your eyes, and they might be playing some nice relaxing music to help you drift off a little bit. And you're almost like going into a sleep. Not quite, but you're sort of sitting there and you're meditating. And I'm really crap at that sort of thing, to be honest. I'm terrible. I've got the monkey chatter going in my mind, but I went somewhere with it. I know that, because at some point during this meditation, I distinctly heard, and it was a Cockney accent. This is the weird thing, a Cockney London accent. And it said, "Tell him he's got something wrong with his waterworks." And it was just like Uncle Albert out of Only Fools and Horses. It was that kind of voice, you know? And I thought, oh my God, where did that come from? And I didn't say anything out loud to him, but I thought, bloody hell, you know, I distinctly heard that. So I thought, well, when it came to my time, after we all came out of this meditation to then say what information we've got, it was my turn. And I thought, well, what do I say? How can I phrase that? Now, I'd heard of the expression where mediums would say, when they're giving someone a reading, "I will wrap this up for you because it's a privacy, so you'll understand it, but no one else in the room will." And they'll say it in a kind of cryptic way so the person understands, but it might be private information. And that's typically to do with medical information or something, you see. So I thought, well, I'll try that approach. I'll try and wrap this up a little bit. So all I could say at the time was, "I think you're seeing a doctor about a medical condition." I know it's very general, but I didn't know how else to say it. And I didn't want to say, "By the way, I think you keep wetting yourself," or something like that, you know. All these ladies there as well, you know, it might embarrass him. But And he goes, yeah, you're right. I am seeing the doctor about medical condition, but I didn't know what else to say. Now, in hindsight, I wish I'd said something like, you might have problems with a prostate condition or of that nature. And I didn't even know what prostate was at the time. My friend had to explain it to me. But apparently it affects men in their late 60s. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Hmm.
It makes them go to the loo a lot more. So it affects their waterworks. And it's not an expression I've used, waterworks. I never say that expression.
Hmm.
So,
Wow.
yeah. And also, I should have said, I'm getting this in a Cockney accent. I should have said that. And I didn't think to say it because that was relevant information. Because he said, oh, that was my father. He was from, Cockney London or something.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's when it started. I started to then think, well, maybe I have got something. That if I'm hearing this voice, where's it come from? Or am I just imagining that? But as I started to give these bits of information, I would see something, like another example was that this lady, her husband had just died. She had put a photograph of him in an envelope, and she asked me and this other lady in this developing, so could we get some information about this man? And this lady said, oh, did he like pets? And the lady goes, yeah. And she goes, well, what did he like? Cats or dogs? And I instantly knew if this guy liked dogs. I just knew it. I said, this guy liked dogs. And she says, what sort of dog was it? And I saw an Alsatian in my mind. And I said, was it an Alsatian? He goes, yeah, that was his favorite breed of dog.
Wow.
So you think, my God, I'm getting what they call hits, and what's the chances of it being wrong or right? But
Hmm.
I wasn't just taking a guess. I'd have to see the picture in my mind. And another example is that when my daughter started going out with this guy called Chris, who comes up in another story later on, I can tell you about that. Remind me to tell you about the Chris
I'm writing
story.
down Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she just started going out with him. And, she said, I was telling her that I said, I'm getting names in mediumship now. She goes, oh, really? She goes, well, as I've got this new boyfriend, Chris, you can tell me then what his mum's name is. And she goes, I'll give you a clue. It starts with M. And I said, no, I said, you're not meant to give me clues. Don't tell me the clue of M. But I just said Mary. And she goes, oh, my God, Dad. I said, yeah, but you did say M. So I just said Mary, but that was right.
Hmm.
So she goes, okay, well, what's his dad's name? So she didn't give me any clues. Now you think, oh my God, how am I going to guess that name? But instantly in my mind, I was shown an image of my own father, who was at the time alive and well, but I was shown his face in my mind. Now his name was Brian. So I just said, Brian. And my daughter goes, oh my God, his name is Brian. So Chris's father was called Brian. So what I was given, they give you something that you recognize and you say, ah, there's Tommy. I can see Tommy. I'll say the name Tommy. Or there's Brian. I'll say the name. And it's that kind of process. You see?
Interesting.
That's how clairvoyance often works. You're given something. I mean, sometimes mediums will get names. I saw a demonstration of a medium once, and she was talking to this girl in the audience. And she said, now I've got your mother here in the spirit world, and she's telling me her name is Jolene. Now, how'd you get that? And you know how she got it? It's because she was getting the song by who was it? Jolene.
Ah, yes.
And she was hearing that song. So she knew to say the name Jolene, you see.
That is
Now, the
wild.
Beatles wouldn't necessarily know anyone called Jolene, so they couldn't show anyone Jolene to her face, but they play the song
Yeah.
Jolene in her head, and that's why she says the name, you see.
Interesting.
So when you think our mediums just hearing the voice saying, my name's Fred and I lived at 24, blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
it doesn't always come through like that. And that's always the claim by skeptics. Well, why don't they give you the name and address? And why don't they tell you their bank account number? That stuff is very, very hard to come through.
Mhm.
So they try their best. And the analogy I give to people, it's imagine smoke signals. You're on one mountain and you've got a friend over there, a Native American guy, for example's sake, who's got a blanket and he's got a fire and he lets up a smoke signal. 2 puffs mean it's your mate over on the hill. 3 puffs mean danger's coming, and 4 puffs mean everything's all fine. And so you have to interpret that symbol to understand things. And it's the same kind of thing with mediumship. And with mediumship training, you're learning to communicate with the spirit, and they're trying to impress these thoughts on you. And the most common way they do it is what they call clairvoyance, which is to see. You see images in your mind. And there's clairaudience where you hear things, but you don't hear it. You might hear one or two voices like Waterworks or Jolene or Fred, and that's all you get is a name quickly come through. So I get names a lot now, and I just get the thought of the name in my head. I don't have to see a face. I just get a thought of a name and I say it, and bang, it's often right.
Interesting. That is interesting, man. Is it something that you like? Is it something that's grown, an ability that's grown? Is it?
Things it's a bit like going to a gym. You have to go. It's that mind muscle. And so by basically practicing in a developing circle is one method of doing it, or practicing readings on people that you don't know.
Oh, lost you there, brother.
Okay, might be a glitch in, isn't it? Is it
back
recording now?
We're back on. Yeah, we're back on. So
And we're recording.
that last bit you just said, I missed.
I did hear the word recording stopped.
Yeah, I've put it back on now. I don't know.
Okay.
Something went funny for a second there.
All right. Whilst we're taking this short break, I'll just try and replug my headphone in because you're coming through the speaker and it's not.
Okay, I'll pause it again. Okay, we're back. We're back, brother. Technology. See what we were saying before? You're just down the road and should be absolutely fine. Talk to someone in the middle of Australia and it's perfect.
Absolutely. It's the fairies in the machine or something.
They are. They're playing with us. Yeah, they know what's coming.
I think I was saying about mediumship. So mediumship, yeah, there's different types. There's clairvoyance, there's clairaudience. There's also another more extremely rare version of mediumship, and that's what they call physical mediumship. And there's very, very few people in this world today that can do it. And I would say it's 1 in 10,000 or something like that as a picking a statistic, whereas you can get a lot more general mediums like myself doing that kind of stuff. And that's where you would manifest a typical famous one is a medium that's now passed on, a Scottish medium called Helen Duncan. And she was able to manifest physical beings in the seance room. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Yeah. So this would utilize a number of things. That first of all, they'd have to do it in a darkened room, which always gives the suggestion where they're faking. Yeah, and you can fake things in a darkened room. But the reason generally it has to be in the dark room is this stuff is sensitive to the light. So if you think back to the old days before we had digital cameras, we'd develop film. We'd have to develop that film in a dark room. That's because if it's suddenly exposed to light, it would ruin the film. So you'd have to do it in controlled conditions. And a seance room for physical mediumship is done in the same way. So typically, they'd black out all the windows. It would normally be done in the evening because it's dark outside anyway. But they'd also traditionally put curtains and tape them shut, or preferably have a room with no windows, basically. So they might do it in a basement even. And what would happen is that they would, you wouldn't switch on the normal light. You'd have a light, but it'd be infrared. So it'd have a filter over it, or it'd be a red bulb. Again, like a dark room, you'd have a red light, which was okay to work with. It didn't destroy the film in a dark room where you're developing film. And it's the same sort of thing. Now, what would happen is the medium would generally, but not always, generally sit in what they call a medium's cabinet. If you think of a wardrobe or a cupboard, they would sit in something like that. And instead of having cupboard doors, they might have a curtain going across, you see. And that the idea is that they were sitting there, and as this energy is built up inside this box, it enables it to become solid. And they would extract a substance from a medium called ectoplasm. They would say, it's claimed that it also comes from the other people in the room as well. You can't see it coming out, but that's what they say. So this stuff comes out, and if you think, well, what's that? And plasm is blood, isn't it? Plasma. So ectoplasm is something like cells or something, and it might be something to do with blood. I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so I don't know the thing. But even when they've taken this ectoplasm to study, it kind of vanishes after a while. It just dissipates and goes away. So you can put it in a jar. By the time you got it back to the lab, it's just dissolved or gone, you see. But it normally goes back into the body of the medium. It's borrowed and it goes back into the body of the medium. And so what happens is that under specific conditions, when the conditions are right, this ectoplasm would form if there's enough energy into maybe a hand. And I met a lady once who said that she was at a seance where there was her and about 5 or 6 other people gathered around a table, and this hand came out of this guy's stomach, literally out of his stomach, a bit like Alien, isn't it? Came out of his hand,
Yeah.
hand came out of his stomach and tapped the table and then went back into his abdomen. Now, that's a small example, but it's impressive, isn't it? What it sounds like, if
Wow.
that's true.
Mhm.
So Helen Duncan, this wartime medium who was from Scotland, she was operating mostly outside of Portsmouth, the naval area. And she was manifesting, but they would manifest as full-bodied people, apparitions. So people that had passed over to the spirit world who died, through the mediumship of Helen Duncan, they could come through and say 10 minutes later, they'd form into this physical person. They would draw back the curtain. Helen Duncan, the medium's fast asleep in a trance because she has not got a clue what's going on. I mean, she knows it's happening, but she's asleep. So to her, she's in some like dreamlike state, if you like. And they're using her energy and her body in some way to help this happen. And typically the first person to come out of that would be the spirit guide of Helen Duncan. It'd be her guide. And I think in her case, it was an Australian guy who had died in like 1900 or something. He drowned or something. And he would be the guy that would sort of run the show. And he said, right, okay, everyone ready? I'm going to bring through a spirit for Mr. So-and-so who's sitting in the back there. And someone would come out and it'd be their relative. Now, with Helen Duncan, she was bringing through dead sailors because she was in the Portsmouth area. And they would come through with their banding of their HMS, whatever it was on their heads. There's controversy about this, by the way. It's not just, oh, yeah, it's controversial to a lot of people. So I better mention that. So she was bringing through these sailors and they say, oh, I died on the HMS Hood or where the ship was and it sunk. And people said, but it hasn't been sunk. It's all fine. Now, what they didn't know was that the British Admiralty were aware that the HMS Hood had sunk like 2 days earlier, but they had not released that information to the general public because they didn't want the morale of the country to get lowered by knowing that these ships were getting destroyed. But what's happening is that Helen Duncan was becoming a security risk during the Second World War because she was bringing through this top secret information through dead sailors that were announcing that they've already died. And so they hatched a plan to put her away for the rest of the war. And so she was basically accused of fraud. Even though she was in Portsmouth, you think, okay, fine her 50 shillings or whatever it was at the time, or 10 guineas. She's for fraud. Don't do it again. But they did a massive trial at the Old Bailey in London, which is normally reserved for murderers and that kind of thing. So she was just a medium accused of fraud, but they took all the way up to London and put her on this 4-week trial. I think it was reported in all the newspapers at the time.
That is wild.
But the interesting thing about the trial, they never mentioned once, the prosecution never mentioned once about the dead sailors coming through from ships. All they were going to talk about was the fact that they said, oh, they found a sheet when the police raided the place. They found a sheet which was they claimed to be this ectoplasm. And so the defense said, well, where is this sheet? And no one could produce it. It wasn't there, you see. So they're saying that this ectoplasm was just an ordinary bed sheet or muslin cloth or something, but no one actually could keep it and say, well, here it is. Then no one had the evidence to present, but they still put her away. And it's what a lot of people call it a show trial. It's done there to sort of say, yeah, she's naughty, she was fraudulent, blah, 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 blah. But they put her away for 9 months so that she couldn't be a security risk to the war effort.
That is wild. Because you think if that wasn't true, if she wasn't really doing that, why would they put someone away? Why would they even bother doing that?
Yeah, at great cost, the Old Bailey. And she even offered to do a demonstration of mediumship in the courtroom, and they refused.
Wow.
Which would have settled it once for all.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That is insane. Very interesting, man.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you know if the people that the apparitions that were coming through, if they were like a full body apparition or were they like a...
Most times they would stand, it would be an infrared light. They would come out and they were seen under infrared light conditions. Now, generally, they would come out. This is the weird thing about seances like that, they would come out wearing shawls. So if you think of sort of like they wouldn't be wearing their clothes of the day, they'd come out with shawls and that. But apparently in other seances where people said, "But can I see your legs?" They'd lift up a dress to show them that, and they hadn't got any legs underneath. Because they're not actually fully manifesting their whole body. They're saying that if you don't need to see our legs, we won't bother the energy to manifest it. So they'll only
Interesting.
manifest typically the head and maybe a basic costume of sorts. But if they lift up their costume, there's perhaps nothing there. But it depends. Each seance is different. Some may say, "Yeah, I know that you want to examine me, so I've manifested a full body so you can examine me." And there's been cases in other seances where doctors or people have taken the pulses of these dead people that are then beaten. It shows that they got a heartbeat of some sort, which is really strange. So, but you'll see if you typed in Helen Duncan seance mediumship or whatever on the internet, you'll come up with all these weird, stupid looking puppets or paper mache dolls. And you're thinking, hang on, how can people believe that these paper mache dolls are physically materialized spirits that are walking around talking? These are just paper mache dolls. And everyone thought just writes it off because of that. But what happened was in the 1940s, Helen Duncan did an interview for an Australian magazine and she explained how it all works. But obviously, the magazine couldn't take photographs of the seance because they didn't have the right equipment. It would have been too dangerous, that kind of thing. So what they did, they got some guy to make up paper mache images and wrapped them in some muslin and say, "This is the kind of thing she does." But it was just a poor imitation, and it's shown there in a rehearsed seance room where they kind of reenact a seance, and it wasn't a real seance. There's these paper mache dolls, and these ones unfortunately have survived today, and they've got out, and it kind of gives her a bad reputation. But if you actually go to the Helen Duncan website and even read books about it, you'll hear a very different account. But I mean, I read an account on the Helen Duncan website, which is run by her granddaughter, where people who were witness to her seances wrote letters to sort of verify. Affidavits, they call them. I will verify that this actually happened. And there's one guy who said that he went to a Helen Duncan seance after she was let out of prison. This is after the war sometime. And he said he saw a full materialization of a Highland Scottish piper coming out of the cupboard with, he had one of those great big hats on. He had bagpipes and everything. And he even came out with a Highland pony that was nodding its head, as ponies do, he said.
Yeah.
And there was accusations that she was somehow producing these manifestations or puppets by swallowing muslin, cheesecloth or something. She could swallow it and then somehow regurgitate. This is the accusation. She could regurgitate it into the shapes of people that could talk and walk and things like that. And you think, they even X-rayed her to see if she had two stomachs like a cow, to see if one stomach was normal and the other stomach she could somehow regurgitate this cloth into the shape of a person. I mean, how would you do that?
I mean, that'd be kind of more amazing than actually bringing the spirit out. If you could do that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Incredible.
Yeah. And she's not the only person. There's other people that have done this sort of stuff. There's been many physical mediums that have done this. There was a lady in the Victorian times, a spirit that used to manifest to a guy called Sir William Crookes, who was at the time, he was the top scientist of the day. And basically going around in Victorian times then, there was accusations that all these mediums were fraudulent and things like that. And so William Crookes stepped forward and he says, "I will settle this matter once and for all. I will investigate this for now." And they said, "Great, you're going to expose these mediums for what they are, fraudulent people." So he spent 4 years studying the mediumship of a young girl called, what's her name? Forget her name now. Young girl. And she was only 15 at the time. And she went into a trance, went into a cabinet, but she did it in laboratory conditions, which is all the skeptics ask for. And was it done under laboratory conditions? And it was done under laboratory conditions. And this medium, Florence Cook, her name was, that's it, Florence Cook, she would go into a trance, and out of the cabinet, in her case, a spirit would come through, and it would be this young girl. Again, she'd be wearing a shawl, and she called herself Katie King. And she allowed her pulse to be taken and things like that. And she even asked on one occasion if she could hold the family baby. And they brought the family baby into the seance room. She held the family baby. So you got a spirit holding the family baby, saying, "What a lovely baby you got," and then handing it back. And then she dematerializes and things,
Wow.
Yeah.
That is wild. I mean, do you know if there's anyone still practicing this type of thing now, or anyone out there now?
There are people out there. I've never seen them. There's a guy in Australia called David Thompson. He's with controversy as well. I've not seen any photographs of his that produce spirits, but he alleges to have, or on his website, the Silver Cord, I think it's called, produces spirit manifestations of people. I have heard recordings, audio recordings, where a spirit's come through. Various people come through, and you can hear the room sort of with the air going whoosh, as if the spirit's going away, like it sucks the air out the room or where it was, that kind of thing. But then there's allegations of fraud against him. So I think that the problem with this kind of thing is that even if you're a genuine medium, there's always people going to allege that you're a fraud, you know. I mean, I remember seeing Gordon Higginson back in the late 1980s. And at the time, Gordon Higginson was the head of the Spiritualist National Union, which is like a spiritualist group, if you like, of all the mediums around the country. And to be the head of the Spiritualist National Union, you have got to be a top-notch, absolutely top-notch medium. And I remember seeing him, and I was so fortunate to see him, but he was also a physical medium, but he didn't do it when I saw him. He just did the normal mediumship. But he said to this guy sitting in the front row, he goes, "You, sir, before you came out tonight," he said, "the coat that you're wearing is not the coat that you originally put on." He said, "You got into your car wearing a different coat, and you decided that wasn't the coat you wanted to wear. So you got back out of your car, you went back upstairs, you threw your coat on the bed, you took the coat that you're now wearing out and put it on out of your wardrobe. You came back down into your car and you parked on the third level below us because it was in a multi-story building." He says, "And my helpers, my spirit guides or whatever, have gone down to that level where the car park is. They found your car. They've just told me that you've got a red sports car with the registration number PYE something something ZL or whatever it was." And this bloke stood there absolutely gobsmacked. He thought, "How on earth did you know all that?" And it's exactly as it was. Now, there will be accusations of fraud against that. I remember talking to a guy I worked with at the time. The very next day, I said, "Oh, I saw this amazing demonstration. This guy," and I told him what I just told you. He goes, "Oh, he's a fake." So it's an accusation of fraud. So I said, "Well, how did he do it?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know."
Yeah.
But so they come out with it's got to be fake. There's no such thing as life after death. There's no such thing as spirits. So it's got to be fake. Rather than say, "Well, let's look into this, be open-minded." That's what I was. I was trying to be open-minded like you are. You're open-minded. It might be fraudulent or it might not be. And the only way I found that mediumship isn't fraudulent, at least as far as I was concerned, was that I started to do it myself. And I started to get stuff. So I'm thinking, there's something in this, you know. And I'm not going to go out and say I'm the best medium in the world, because I certainly am not. But I'm certainly getting information correct with people, and I've done readings, obviously. So, but he's a top notch. He can get specific information, you know. And he used to do seances where little girls would manifest out the floor or dive into the floor and dissolve, people like that, you know. So it is extremely rare, but it still happens. And there's another medium called Scott. I can't remember his surname, but I think he's somewhere in England. And again, he's got controversial accusations aimed against him. But what annoys me is that a lot of these people that accuse mediums of being frauds, and they say, "Oh, it's all body language, it's all cold reading, blah blah blah." You see it on YouTube a lot. I put a comment and say, "Well, when was the last time you saw a medium? Perhaps you can tell me about the last medium you saw and studied in life, you know." And they've never been to see a medium, but they think they know how it all works. You know?
Yeah. They watched Darren Brown and they're like,
Darren Brown, yeah, he's answered to all our prayers, you know. But you see, it's like there's certain things that can't be explained. I mean, I mentioned
100%.
Chris Hayes the other earlier. I said, I'll tell you about Chris Hayes. So I'll talk about this medium I saw. This medium I saw many years ago, well, about 10 years ago, I suppose now. It was a young medium, and I think he comes from the Southampton area, called Ross Bartlett. Now, my wife saw him. I wasn't able to go, but she said, "Oh my God, he's brilliant." She said, "He came to me first of all, and he said, 'I'm coming to this lady here,' and he pointed to her. He says, I want to talk to you about Emily, and she lives in Bristol, and she works in a supermarket, and she's really bored with it. And her daughter Emily lived in Bristol, and she worked for Tesco's, and she was really bored with it, and that
Man.
bang on.
Yeah.
They're thinking, my God. So she said, we got to go and see him again. So I told a friend of mine, who I was in a circle with, I said, oh, if you're booking mediums, you better book this guy. He's really, really good. So he got in contact with him, and he booked him to appear in Ruislip in Middlesex at this building. Now, at the time, I lived in Cheshire. My wife lived here in Weymouth. So she had to travel up to a station, I forget where it was, Basingstoke or something. And I picked her up from Basingstoke, and then we drove all the way to Ruislip, and we got stuck in traffic, and we arrived late. And it's like, oh, how embarrassing, because we got stuck in traffic. We found the building, and there was a man with a white shirt, an elderly man with a white shirt on the door in front of the table. And he was obviously the guy that took the payment. So he saw me, and I could hear that Ross was already doing his stuff. He's already started. I thought, shit, we're 15 minutes late, old bugger. And so he said, look, he goes, go and sit down. And he whispered this, go and sit down and come to me afterwards to pay your money. And we said, okay, thank you. So that we wouldn't disrupt the proceedings too much. So we sheepishly sort of went in, and someone pointed some seats out, and we sort of sat down there. So took our coat off, and literally I was just getting my coat off like that. And he was talking to this lady, and then he looked at me, and I literally just got my coat off, and he said, I'd now like to come to the gentleman to my left. And I thought, oh, crikey. So he said, I've got a lady called, and I can't remember the name, but I'll say it's Agnes. It's a very old-fashioned name, but I can never remember it because it wasn't a name I was used to or even heard of. So I'll say Agnes, but I know that if you read in my book, it was something else. But he said, I'm coming to the gentleman here. I've got Agnes to speak to you. And I said, I don't know an Agnes. And I thought it maybe means the person behind me. And he goes, no, it's definitely you. I thought, well, I don't know anyone. And he goes, Agnes, who's married to Edward. And I thought, I don't know anyone, Edward. And so I thought, this is really terrible. It's terrible reading. Nothing's going right here. And he said, well, Agnes says that your brother Phil goes and photographs graves. And I thought, shit, my brother is called Phil, and he does go and photograph family graves. And he was so confident that he said she's saying that he's photographed her grave. He said, do you have your brother's phone number on it? He wanted me to ring my brother up there and then, get him on the speaker to say, yeah, I've been photographing her grave. He wanted me to do that. Now, how confident is that as a medium to do that?
Yeah, man.
Especially when I'm saying no to him. So, but unfortunately, I'd changed phones, and I hadn't entered my brother's new number or his number into my new phone. So I said, I can't do that. I'm really sorry. So, but I thought you got to have some balls to say that.
Yeah, 100%.
So basically, he carried on, and he said, now, Agnes is telling me that she watches on Morgan. Now, Morgan is my daughter. And I thought, bloody hell. How did you get that then? So I thought, well, he must be with me. He said, Phil, my brother. He said, my daughter, Morgan. But I still don't know who Agnes was. So he's talking about Morgan and stuff like that. And then he said, he said, just see that man over there with the white shirt? Now, he was pointing to the guy with the white shirt that was on the door when we came in, who said, go and take your places. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, his name is Chris Hayes. And he says, I'm being told that I've got to tell you this sort of thing. He said, let's go for it. He wasn't even sure of this himself. It was right, because it was really strange from his point of view. Is this right? He was doubting his own thing, but he said, let's go for it. He said, you see that man over there? He's called Chris Hayes. I went, yeah. He said, Agnes is telling me that Morgan is also connected to a Chris Hayes. And I said, absolutely 100% correct. I said, my daughter Morgan has been going out with a guy called Chris Hayes for the last 2 years.
Oh.
So the spirit world, or Agnes, was saying that, Chris Hayes over there is, by sheer coincidence, if you like, or serendipity, they've got a Chris Hayes there, and they could point out that my daughter was going out with a Chris Hayes. Now, what kind of cold body language reading, hot reading, where could that be?
No way.
It wasn't done with credit cards or anything like that. They could track my name because I hadn't even paid the cash on the door yet. They didn't know who I was when I came through the door, And
Man.
I was saying, sorry, I can't, and they can't say it's mind reading because I was saying, I'm sorry, I don't know this Agnes is or Edward she's married to. Now, he also brought through my Welsh grandfather. He didn't say his name. He says, "Oh, your Welsh grandfather's now come through." He's saying, "Carry on doing the artwork," which I do artwork. I'm an artist as well. And then he mentioned a couple of more of my brother's names. So I thought, my God. So anyway, it was
Wow.
an astounding reading. So when I got home, I think I phoned my mum the next day and I said, look, we've had this fantastic reading, and I played her the reading. I think I went round the house and played it to her, and she listened to it, but she didn't know who this Agnes was. I said, "Who's Agnes?" She goes, "I don't know." So then she went and spoke to my auntie Sue, who lives in Southampton. She rang her up, and she's talking about this reading to her, and she goes, "Oh, well, I know who she is. That's your auntie Doris." And I said, "What? What do you mean, my Auntie Doris?" And it turned out that when I was a kid, I had a Auntie Doris, and she was a dear old lady. She used to take us out on picnics and everything like that. And one of the things I always fondly remember about her is that she would have three fingers on that hand and three fingers on that hand because she had operations where she removed her fingers. Now, as a kid, I didn't understand why she had to have her fingers removed. All I knew that she kept going to hospital and having a finger removed and a finger removed. And every time I see her, I said, "Auntie Doris, have you had any more fingers taken off?" I thought it was like a hobby that she just liked having her fingers taken off. But uh, as I grew up and understood, it was something to do with arthritis or something. They cut her things off apparently so that her fingers could move better like that. Apparently, so
Okay.
that was one of the things I do remember about her. But I always called her Auntie Doris because that was her name. But apparently, Doris was her middle name. Her first name was Agnes. But she didn't like the name Agnes, so she chose her middle name. And then the penny dropped. They said Agnes, who's married to Edward, Auntie Doris was married to Uncle Ted. Edward.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
That's insane. Yeah, how
Yeah,
would anyone get that?
yeah,
This
yeah.
is,
You see, and I had to do my homework and figure that one out. And again,
yeah,
you can't say it's mind reading because I didn't have that information in there. You see,
yeah.
and then I thought about it even more. I thought that's why they chose me as the next reading because when the energy was present, they knew on the other side. I think they had such a hit on their hands. The fact that their Chris Hayes was the same name as my Chris Hayes,
Hmm.
and they wanted to point that out. And if they left it to the last, it may not have happened. They may have run out of time, or the energy may not have been enough to do it. So they
Yeah.
wanted to get that serendipity moment in with that hit. And that's why he
Wow,
doubted. He
man.
thought, "Is this real?" He said, "Is this real?" He says, "Let's go for it." And it was a big hit, that one. Amazing.
Yeah, it is.
See,
It
I was only
really is.
23. He was only 23, the medium.
Wow. I mean, how could there's just no way you could know that, you know?
Yeah.
You can't call it guessing, coincidence, you know, as you said, body language. You can't how? You know, it's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There are still people that still won't believe it 100%.
No, no, that's
You know?
that's it. Oh, Darren Brown can explain it, but no, you can't because
No.
these were facts, real people,
Yeah,
things
yeah.
like that, you know. And the thing is, as I've chatted to my friend Andy, who's a colleague of mine on the spiritual Paranormal Peep Show,
Hmm.
he's a medium too, and we discuss these things quite a lot. And you know, if you're going to pay all these people to be your accomplices in this scam that you're going to do, you've got maybe 30 people, 40 people in that room. You're going to pay maybe 10 of them to do a surfboard, 20 quid each.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
20, 40, yeah, that's 200 quid you've lashed out just to try and get information. And you might have made 200 quid that night anyway for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
taking.
And that's never going to stay a secret. Those people are never going to, for that
No,
sort of money, never going to
no,
stay quiet. They're
no.
all going to come out and say, yeah, I did that.
And you got to remember all these facts that you've prearranged with everyone.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
also somehow you've got to know the name of Agnes's name and all that kind of stuff when the person that comes in doesn't even know, you know.
Yeah.
And I can say I wasn't paid. I definitely I wasn't paid, you know.
Yeah,
I paid them.
100%, 100%. I know people personally that have had like private readings, and that have come out like totally believing because they've been told stuff that there is just no way that nobody else even knows, you know, and you know, and it's wild, but it's I believe it, man, 100%, 100%.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, talking to my mum, I'll say this, then you can ask me another question if you like. But
Mhm.
whilst I remember to say, it, I think is an interesting thing to mention. I mentioned my mum there that I had to ask her about who Agnes was, and she got on the phone to my auntie Sue. Well, my mum sadly passed away in 2016, you know, and I happened to be there when it happened. I was editing in the upstairs room, and she had come upstairs to go to bed early, and she said she wasn't feeling well. And as she was crawling up the stairs, my dad called upstairs. He goes, "Neil, I'm going to go to bed with your mum tonight. She wants to go. She's not feeling very well and wants to go to bed, but she wants me to go to bed with her." And I said, "Oh, all right." I thought that was a bit unusual because normally my mum would go to bed about 10:30, and my dad would stay downstairs and watch a documentary about the war or football or something like that, and maybe come to bed an hour later. So I thought it was a bit unusual. Why does my mum want my dad to go to bed? It's like she's a bit frightened or something. That's not, I didn't say anything, but that's what I thought. So as she crawled up the stairs, and I could hear her come up the stairs, the door was half shut, and I just shouted through the door, "I hope you feel well in the morning," sort of thing. "No, I hope you feel better in the morning." And as I said that, I had a weird feeling in me, something I've never had before. I felt what I was saying was untrue or not a lie, but I just felt that something wasn't right. What I've said doesn't ring true. "I hope you feel well in the morning." I thought something's off here, and I just had a feeling. I couldn't explain it. Anyway, went to sleep on the sofa because although there was a room I was editing, it didn't have a bed in it, so I had to go and sleep on the sofa downstairs in the bed in the living room. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I could hear boom like that upstairs. And I thought, crikey, what's happened there? And my dad was shouting downstairs. He goes, "Neil, your mum's fainted and I can't wake her up." So basically, to cut a long story short, I went upstairs because I was saying, check her pulse. He didn't know where her pulse was. And I said, put in a recovery position. He didn't know how to do that. So I thought I'd better go and help out. So I went upstairs and I looked at her. I just took one look at her and she was as white as a sheet. I said, "Oh my God, I think she's dead." And I put my hand on her neck, couldn't feel a thing. I said, "I think she's dead." But we rang the ambulance anyway. Paramedic came out. He started doing stuff on, and I had to go and get something out of the car, medical stuff out of his car for him, and I gave it to him, and he had to set this thing up, whatever it was. Never seen it before. I don't know what it was. It's like some sort of tripod thing in a bag. Didn't know what it was. And he said, "You're going to have to do chest compressions." I said, "I've never done that before." He said, "Just keep pressing." So I had to keep pressing her chest, and she had an oxygen mask on at this point. And I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she might come back to life or something. Maybe she's just passed out. So I was, "Come on, Mum," pressing on her chest. And then at some point, I remember these other ambulance guys just came in the house. I thought, I don't remember calling them, but these were colleagues. And there's 4 of them. Apparently, they had to have 5 of these people, and they all take it in turns to do chest compressions. And they worked on it all night. And about sort of like by 5 o'clock in the morning, they came downstairs, and the guy said, "I'm really sorry to say that, we haven't been able to resuscitate her. We've declared her dead at such and such an hour." Thinking, shit, the world has changed forever from my point of view,
Yeah.
And anyway, what was it now? My brother had a weird dream about a week afterwards where my mum came back, and she came back to the family house, and we all went out for a pub meal, and we took her up to the local pub for a pub meal, and then we all came back in the dream, he said, and then she said she had to go back up the stairs, and as she was going up the stairs, she started to disappear and vanish, and dissolve. And my brother said, "Will we see you again?" And she shouted, "I will come back to the land of shadows. I will come back to the land of shadows." What a weird thing to say, So and that was a dream over with. Anyway, about 10 months later, I found myself in the lucky position, if you like, because apparently there's like a 3-year waiting list for these people. But there's these people who do this kind of a Ouija board thing. They're based in Poole, funny enough.
Okay.
Interesting. You might want to check them out. Called Heavenly Voices. Heavenly Voices. Okay. They do this a Ouija board thing, and I'd heard about them through various people around the area, and they said, "Oh, they're really good. They're really good." Well, it just so happened that we got a phone call one Saturday morning saying they've got a cancellation, and the lady that rang us up said, "I put my name down and they've accepted, but I need a few more people to be bums on seats there to make it worthwhile them coming over." So we said, "Yeah, okay, we'll do it." So I took my audio recorder with me and got permission. "Can I record it?" "No problem," they said. So they put their Ouija board out on the table, and the first girl went on, whose house it was, and a boyfriend of hers, who was like 17 at the time, and she was like 16 or something, came through, and he sort of explained how he died being hit by a train, which was true, all this sort of stuff. He'd been hit by a train, he'd been involved in a scuffle with some other lads and that kind of stuff. And then it went to my wife, and personal people came through from her family, and she spoke to them. And then at the end, we had a break, and then it was my turn at the very end. And the person who was coming through on this board said, "There's someone now to speak to Neil." And so I said, "Okay, who is it?" And it spelled out Mum, M-U-M. And they said, "What's your name?" And she spelled her name, Margaret, correctly. And they said, "What's Neil's date of birth?" Because they want to try and validate things. So she spent December. That's the month of my birth. And then it's over to me. I could ask her any question I wanted. So I would say, "Okay, still, is this real? I'll ask you questions. What road did we live in?" And she put Love. And you're thinking, love? And that's what the girl who was part of this team, having voices, said, love. I said, no, there's one more letter. And then went back to L, Lovell. That's the name of the road, Lovell Road, that we lived in Chalfont St. Peter. And I thought, oh my God. So I started to ask questions like, okay, so I said, when we found you dead, what happened? Did you go through a tunnel of light, or what happened? And she said her mum was waiting in the corner of the room for her already. So her mum, my gran, who had died in New Zealand back in 1980 or something, who never believed in life after death, interestingly enough, she was now coming to collect my mum, who had now passed over to the spirit world herself. And she said she was waiting in the corner of the room, which is where the doorway would be, you see. And I've got this thing about doorways, so I can explain about that in a minute. But she said, and she took her over. And I said, because that's why I said, who have you met over there? Have you met Granny and Grandad Bob, or have you met your mum and dad? And she goes, yeah, my mum was waiting in the corner of the room for me already, sort of thing. And she said all sorts of things, but my dad was around then, and she talked about my dad. And I said, well, what do I say? What do I say to my brothers, that I spoke to? And they said, yeah, just tell them that you spoke with me. And that's all she said. No, she couldn't give any astounding information from the universe. Just tell me you spoke with me. And that was it. Oh God, all right.
Wow.
But yeah, it was an amazing thing. And I saw a report, someone had posted on Facebook or something, and I contacted her to ask her some more information. She had had a reading with these people, and her father came through to her, but her brother, his son, was going to get married that year. And of course, he wasn't going to be there at the wedding because he had passed over. So they said, could you write a wedding speech from your side of life? So he said, yeah. So he dictated a wedding speech through the Ouija board, which then they wrote down and then they read out at the wedding.
Wow, man.
Yeah. It's in my book. I asked her permission, could I put it in my book? So it's in
Yeah.
True Tales of the Paranormal. But yeah, he dictated the wedding speech. So she came through a second time about a year and a half later or something. I can't remember everything what she said now, but yeah, it is amazing. And the thing is, with mediumship, you're saying, oh, I'm getting a name. With this, you can get a name, surname, road address, what car did I drive. You can get all that information, and you think, well, that's established many facts. Now let's just talk,
Yes. Yeah.
And I did ask her. I said, so what's it like on the other side? Just I know it's probably going to be difficult to explain. So what's it like? And she just put lovely. It's lovely over here. Yeah. And someone else that we asked earlier, we said, what's it like over there? And he said, it's pure love over here. Pure love, no war, just pure love, peace and stuff. And I thought that's really lovely.
Man, yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. What was you going to say about doorways? What was your...
Okay, yeah. So we go back to the Helen Duncan thing where she's in this seance cabinet. These materialization mediums use seance cabinets, and the spirit appears. And I was told it's because it builds up energy inside the seance cabinet. Now, many people tend to see ghosts, and I said to them, "Where do you see that ghost?" And they said, "Oh, it's standing in the doorway," or "I saw my husband appear in the doorway," or "I saw my deceased, whoever it was, standing in the window, just outside the window." And they always seem to be in some sort of framework construction. They're always in a doorway. They're always in a box-like construction, which to me is very similar to the medium's cabinet. Now, my mum said that her own mum was waiting in the doorway by the corner of the room. So Which leads me back to a story that I heard from a lady in about 1994, something like that. At the time, I was doing tarot card readings, and this old lady rang me up, and she said, "Oh, I'd like a tarot card reading." And I said, "Yeah, I can do that for you." But she didn't drive. She goes, "I don't drive. Can you come to me?" And I thought, all right, then, okay, yeah, sure, I will. So I wrote down her address and managed to find out where she lived and everything before we had bloody phones and things. I had to find it on a map somewhere.
Old
And
school.
drove to the place, yeah, about 10 miles away. She's a little old lady living in a bungalow and everything. And I gave her this 40-minute reading, and she goes, "Oh, that's very accurate." I said, "Thank you." And she goes, "But there's one thing you didn't mention." And I said, "What's that?" She goes, "You didn't mention my husband." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Well, look," I said, "if I felt your husband around, I definitely would have mentioned him to you." She goes, "Well, that's interesting." She goes, "Let me tell you this." She goes, "See this room here?" And she showed me the bedroom because it's a bungalow. My husband spent the last year of his life ill in bed. He was so ill, he had to have an oxygen mask to help him breathe. And she goes, one day she was leaning forward in the bed, puffing up the pillows to try and make him more comfortable. And he just kept saying, "I feel so ill. I feel so ill. I just want to die." And she said, "But that, he literally just died in her arms in the bed, like that." I thought, my God. So she laid down the guy, laid him down, the husband. And she said she saw a vaporous mist come out of his chest, and it rose up to the ceiling and went across the ceiling, and it went down into the airing cupboard in the corner of her room. It went into the airing cupboard. And she said, "And I told my doctor this, and he just laughed at me." But she goes, "I know you won't laugh." She goes, 6 months later, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw, and this is her words, not mine, and it might sound politically incorrect these days, but this is what she said, and she was from that time, I suppose. And this was the mid-90s. She said, "I saw a red Indian coming out that cupboard." Now, today we're told we've got to call them First Nations or Native American, and I respect that, but that's the word she said. She goes, "I saw a red Indian coming out that cupboard." And she said she saw a full feathered headdress. He had war paint. She said she could even see the bone necklace he was wearing around his neck. He was bare chested, but she couldn't see the lower half of him. And he was doing a kind of a crawling action, almost like doing a forward crawl swimming, trying to come out of this cupboard. And she said behind him, she saw a man who was in the shadows. And then behind that man was a third person who had a hat on, but he was in the shadows. She couldn't see him clearly. But the one she saw very clearly was this Native American. And I said, "Wow." And I said, "Did it speak to you?" And she goes, "No." She goes, "But it's happening virtually every night. Every night I keep waking up and seeing this guy coming out of the cupboard." Now, I said, do you know much about spiritualism?" She goes, "No." I said, "Have you ever heard of a spirit guide term?" She goes, "No." So here was a lady telling me about a Native American Indian cupboard, coming out the cupboard, and she was describing a classic Native American spirit guide as depicted in seances. Now,
Wow.
in seances, you get typically a spirit guide who oversees a seance to make sure it's all going, and they're typically advanced souls, people that are more in tune with nature. They're on a higher understanding of how things work, and they tend to be, but not always. They can be more often than not Native Americans because they are more at one with nature. They lived out in nature. Us Westerners, like we're so immersed in this world, we're not thinking of the bigger picture. They thought of the bigger picture, so they go into a higher plane of understanding, if you like. So they come back as almost, and I described this to her. I said, "I think that your husband thought this stuff was a load of rubbish." And she goes, "Yeah, that's right. He thought all of it was rubbish." I said, "That's the key." I said, I said, "This is what I think's happened. The mist you saw coming out of his chest was his soul or spirit, if you like." I've heard an expression since that time. People, nurses and carers and things, they've seen this as well. They call it soul mist. That's what the term is. That's what they call it. So she said it went over to the airing cupboard. I said, "You saw it going to the airing cupboard." And I said, "That airing cupboard," I said, "I believe is a portal." I said, "You can think of it like this. Think of it as a revolving doorway in a hotel lobby. So you can go in it, but you can come out of it." And I said, "Your husband was sucked into it and he went off to where he had to go to through that doorway. But," I said, "he can't come back under his own power because he's got limited ability to do so. He needs a bus driver, if you like, to bring him back. And that Native American Indian, I believe, is trying to bring your husband back. And I think he's the guy behind him." So she said, "And what do I do?" So I said, "Well, if it happens again, ask him the question. Say, what do you want? How can I help you? What do you want with me?" And see if it it might, when you give communication back, it opens up the link stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Normally in a mediumship reading, when someone says, I've got a thread here, can anyone take it? As soon as someone says it, bang, the link opens up. It's like opening up a telephone. Is anyone there? Yes. Then a conversation begins. And I said, if you talk to that person, it might help forge that link.
Yeah.
And so I said, if you don't get any joy with it, I said, what you can do is contact director inquiries. That's before the internet, of course. 192 was the number. And I said, ask the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, the place where I went to earlier, I mentioned, or there's another place in London called the College of Psychic Studies, and you can tell them what you've told me and see if they can offer advice. And I got in my car that night after doing the reading, and I thought, oh my God, and I was just in my mirror, and I thought, I don't want to look in the back seat in case something's there in the back seat, But what a story.
That's wild. That's so cool.
Yeah. But it deals with doorways again, you see.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. Have you ever seen anything? Have you seen an apparition or anything like strangeness?
Yeah, I'd say this would be it'd be about that time actually, maybe a year or two earlier. I was staying at someone's house and I was in a spare bedroom, and I woke up and I saw a man standing by the doorway. I was half asleep and I couldn't see the head, but I saw a shirt and I saw the trousers, and he's quite a portly sort of figure. And I thought it might have been an old guy and he was trying to talk to me, but I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying. It was like mumbling. I couldn't quite work it out, but I couldn't see the head. And I was going, what? And it was like trying to say something. And then I don't remember either. I fell asleep or it just vanished. I can't remember. But it did freak me out a little bit. And that's the only time I've ever seen something. And again, I could have been half asleep. I could have been dreaming. I'll accept all that from skeptics and things like that, because it's a weak kind of story. It's not super strong. I couldn't test his pulse or anything like that. But that's what I can only say and I don't really see that many things. So that's one of the very few things I have seen.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, man. So when you're like reading or, communicating spiritually, do you see like in your mind's eye the person that you're connecting with?
Sometimes. You don't often and I can only talk from my personal experience. I can't, there'll be people like Tony Stockwell describing very clearly the man or the lady they're communicating with. They'll describe. To give you a recent example, I was doing some readings somewhere in Weymouth here, and I was giving various messages, and then I suddenly got this person, and I got the name Mark. I suddenly said, I've got the name Mark. Can anyone take Mark here? And there wasn't many people at this place, and this lady put her hand up. She goes, yeah, I can take Mark. And as soon as she accepted the message, bang, this communication opened up the line. It's like the telephone. Hello, who's there? And then I started to get the information. Once the information was accepted, like the name, then the spirit starts talking, and I think I know I'm with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I suddenly felt I was in a room. I was shown a room like a flat, and I felt I was in a flat. I knew I was in a flat. You get that feeling. You just know you're in a flat. And I felt there was a sofa, and I also felt it's like these things. They're not saying, by the way, my name's Fred, and I died on such and such, and this is where. It's like you know it. It's almost like as if you're getting their thoughts in your head, and it's like you drive a certain car.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to tell yourself you drive a certain. You drive a certain car. It's that kind of knowledge. You know something. So I knew that this guy had died on the sofa, and I felt there was a connection with drugs and drink, alcohol abuse, that sort of thing. And I felt that he had died possibly of a drug overdose. This lady said, yep, he did. I said, this guy didn't die in hospital, did he? And I said, I felt he died in this flat on the sofa. They found him and they said, she says, yeah. And he was trying to describe the way he looked. And I was sort of seeing a shady image in my mind's eye, and I felt something on his head. He's talking about his head. And she said, well, he used to brush his hair back like that or something. So maybe that's what he's trying to tell me. I don't know. But then he's even trying to tell me the brand of drink he was drinking. I kept seeing a bear on a glass. I thought, why am I seeing a bear on a glass? And you're going to say Hofmeister.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah. He was trying to tell me he drank Hofmeister lager. You see, really weird things like that.
Wow.
I got the information. I did say the name of a road, but I got the name of the road wrong. I said, I'm not sure if I'm going to get this right. But I said, I know I absolutely know 100% this, and I just knew it, that this guy lived in a road, but it was called Avenue. It wasn't called Close, it wasn't called Terrace, it wasn't called Street, or it wasn't called Road. I knew it was something Avenue. And she said, yeah, he lived in blah, blah Avenue, you see. And so, and then suddenly I was shown this woman and I could see her, but over her, I could see, and this is all in the mind. I felt this, you feel it and you kind of see it in your mind's eye, like you imagine it, but all this money was dropping over her head like cash. So it's like a windfall. I said, either you're about to get it or you've got it. I can see he's telling me you're going to get a load of money from somewhere, like a windfall. And she goes, yeah, I've just got it. Literally something, I don't know where it came from. Someone gave her a load of money. It might have been a payment from somewhere. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't my business to know. But I was just telling her that sort of thing. And one of the things that really kind of kicked off with that was that I felt that he wanted to say sorry to her. And I felt that I should say sorry. And I said, he wants to tell me that he's sorry for whatever happened between you two. He's sorry. And she started to cry. And I felt emotional as well. And that's that you feel their emotions. And then I was getting information about the other side. And he was saying, and I kind of translated it, but it's almost you feel it again. You don't get the clear words, I will say this. You feel the idea. And he was talking about the grass is greener. The grass is always greener on the other side. And he was trying to say that, but I knew he was saying the grass is definitely greener on the other side. That's what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
You see. But it varies from medium to medium. Some mediums will be more vague. Others will get much more direct information. I've seen that Gordon Higginson giving out people's door numbers, phone numbers, and all that sort of stuff. Amazing stuff.
Incredible, man. It really is incredible. Quite a difficult question because we don't have the answers to this, and we're just going off of lots of people's experiences. But what do you think the other side is? What do you think happens on the other side?
Well, I can't. Yeah, quite a difficult one.
Yeah,
but
it is.
the things I've read that, and I've read so much stuff that you kind of build up a general idea what it is. But a lot of these spirits tell us that the other side is all around us. It's actually all around us as we speak. So if you think of like radio and TV waves, you're picking up radio and TV waves and they go through the TV. You've got all those around you all the time. So we're living in a spectrum of frequencies. And obviously we got the spectrum that we can see invisible light where, from a certain, and then you go into the gamma rays or infrared rays and things that you can't see beyond those spectrums. I suspect that they're in a spectrum of activity that we can't pick up, and so that's why it's all around us, and they're operating at a different frequency, if you like, or a different spectrum of activity. But what's it like? It varies. Again, it might depend what frequency you're at. Now, in general terms, I've read various books on there, but there's also a very interesting medium that's passed on called Leslie Flynn, and he was what they call a voice medium, a direct voice medium. So he wouldn't necessarily physically manifest spirits in the room, but he would manifest the voices of spirits. And he used to produce an ectoplasm, not body, but a voice box, which would be suspended in the air in his sounds cabinet and actually photograph it infrared. And it'd be ectoplasm, but it would shape itself into a human voice box. And then the spirits on the other side would somehow impress their thoughts onto this voice box and it would talk. Wow. It's like ventriloquism almost, but not quite. And many, many different spirits came through, but they would describe it. There's no sun over there. There's no sun. They've never seen the sun. And the light seems to come from everywhere, which leads me back to what my mum had said in the dream of my brother, where she was going up the stairs and he said, will you come back to us? She goes, yes, I will return to the land of shadows. We can only have shadows here because of one thing in the sky, and that's the sun. It casts a shadow because it's coming from a certain direction.
Yes.
So if light is coming all around, you wouldn't necessarily get shadows, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Now that leads me to another story. I don't have much time, but I'll tell you this story.
This is great, man.
This is a story that concerns shadows, which, as we're moving into it, I thought I'll tell you, it's a fairy story, if you like.
Yeah.
People can find out about it themselves. There's a film on the internet, but I bought it as a DVD many years ago, called The Fairy Faith. So it's FAIRY like fairy washing up the quid, The Fairy Faith by a Canadian filmmaker called John Walker. And in the film, it's a documentary. He went out and interviewed various people from Canada, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, places like that, about what they claim to be fairies. They've experienced them in some way. So a different form of spirit, if you like. It's on a frequency that's maybe closer to home, because some people can see them. And so he interviewed this guy who was a Glaswegian builder, I think, by trade. And what he'd gone on holiday to this place where there was a hill, and it was known locally as the Fairy Fort or the Fairy Hill. And he said it just rained, and this would be about 1998, 1999, so it's kind of more recent times. And he said that he was by himself and he was enjoying the stunning view, and it just rained and the clouds were parting now, and he saw a rainbow forming over the valley. And he thought, what an absolutely stunning view this is, you know. And all the time he was looking up there, he said there was something in his peripheral vision moving down by his feet, and it kept bugging him. But he thought, no, I'll carry on looking up there. And he thought, what a lovely view. But he thought, well, what the hell is that down there? And he looked, and down by his feet, he said there was this small woman, maybe a couple of feet high, with brown leathery looking skin, and she had like an old hat on, like appeared to be made of leather. She's very ugly. She even had kind of whiskers, he said. And she had with her what he described as, they looked like an old pair of sheep shears. That's what they looked like an old pair of sheep shears. And he said, this is where it gets freaky, and I always tell people to buckle up. Because
Let's go.
yeah, let's go. He said she was cutting around the sole of his shoe, right? And he said where his shadow, because we're in the shadows now, where his shadow extended, there was the male equivalent of this being, this small being. There was a male version. And this is where it's freaky. He was rolling up this guy's shadow like paper. Yeah. Rolling it up.
Whoa.
And this guy, he thought, what do I say? So he said, I didn't know what to say other than oi, like that. And he said they looked at each other, surprised, oh my God, he can see us. And he went, and they just vanished like that. Wow. And he said, I dread to think what would have happened had I not seen them.
Yeah,
And
man.
you're thinking, my God, you know, so how can you steal a shadow? You know, how can you roll a shadow up like paper? And people said, well, it's like Peter Pan, isn't it? His shadow becomes apart from it. Yeah, it's like Peter Pan.
Yeah.
But then I started to think again about this story. You analyze it and you're thinking, okay, I've heard of things called Brownies, and these like a lot of Scottish tales talk about, and probably in Ireland as well, where there's these small wee folk, as they call them. They're brown, leathery looking people, leather skinned. This could be them. And he said that, you know, they're trying to take his shadow, and it just stopped raining and the sun was coming out. So if it was overcast and raining, he wouldn't have been casting a shadow. But as soon as the sun came out and began to cast a shadow, they were there pouncing on him. It's like they were waiting for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they wanted to wait for that shadow to form to steal it, you know? And what my mum said in the dream, I will come back to the land of shadows. And it's like wherever these beings come from, wherever they exist in some reality, maybe they don't have shadows because they don't have a sun where they are.
Yeah, man.
And shadows, for some reason, are a commodity to them. We interviewed a guy on the Paranormal Peep Show called Simon, I forget his surname now, but he's written loads of stuff on fairies and stuff like that. And he knows that story. And he told me a story. And he said that one guy woke up on his bed. He's literally just in his bed. And he said there was a brownie kind of creature on his bed. And he said it had a bag with him. And he said it looked at him, and he said it was he said the best description I can give of that look, he said it was like eyeing me up like a horse at the market. You know, like you look at a horse, is that a good horse? It was looking him up and down like that. You know, what can I get from this guy? Is he of value to me in some way? And he had a bag ready to take whatever it was, you know?
Wow, man. I mean, what I find so interesting is, like you, I've collected a lot of paranormal people's experiences. And what keeps coming up, like, and this is what I find so interesting, like the synchronicities in people's encounters, is these small fairy-like creatures, which are all around the world. You know, in the US, you've got the Pukwudgies. in Devon, you know, pixies, whatever you want to call them, that they seem to be the same sort of thing. But people keep describing these things as being like a brown look.
Yeah.
But when you say brownies, it's like that's come up again. Brown,
Yeah.
brown. I keep hearing that.
Yeah.
But these things seem to form in like a brown. Like you can see that they've got clothing on in some cases and stuff like that. They're very small, but they're all brown.
Yeah.
And I
It's
keep hearing-
diversity.
Yeah.
I've got to go.
Well,
Ian,
interesting.
I'm
Yeah, no
afraid.
problem, man. I've
All right.
loved talking to you. Thank you so much, man. I could talk to you all day. We've got to do this again, man. If you don't mind
Sure.
coming back,
I'll be happy to do another one at some point. No problem.
that would be amazing. Thank you so much. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, so they can find us on the Paranormal Peep Show on YouTube. And the channel's Neil Peel. My name, Neil Peel, PEPWL, Neil Peel, the Paranormal Peep Show. And they can see all our interviews on YouTube. We're also on the various podcast channels under the Paranormal UK Radio Network. If people want to check out the artwork that I do, it's neilwardart.co.uk. If they want to see some of the books I've written, the most recent one being True Tales of the Paranormal by Neil Ward, and that's available on Amazon. Or they can go further back in time to 2004, where they can see the book, which I co-illustrated, called Fairycraft, Faeri craft, or one word, Fairycraft. So that's there as well. And the other book is coming out in November, I think it is, which is Modern or Unsolved Modern Mysteries, something like that. I can't remember the title offhand, but it's something like that. Unsolved Modern Mysteries.
Awesome, man. Well, links will be in the show description, so people can go right now and check you out. Thank you so much, brother. Let's do this again, because
Sure.
I can listen to you all day, man. So thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very much. Guys, thank you very much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, share it where you can. That is a great way to support the show. And we'll be back very soon for more freaky conversations. In the meantime, stay safe and keep it freaky. Bye for now. Thank you very much, sir.
Cheers. All right, I've got to go. My wife's calling me for lunch.